Hi everyone, welcome to a new video. I'm very aware of the fact that it's been a really long time since I've done a video. Let's see if I still remember how to do it. Basically, I've been very busy with my new job, which has been the best, the absolute best. And I've also been working on a little thing of my own. So my first book of all time, and also my first book on Jane Austen is going to be coming out very soon. So I am waiting to see the cover to share news about it, but I will as soon as I have some. But yeah, I have been working on that as well, and I'm really excited. But that meant that YouTube kind of was left a little bit on the back burner, but I'm very excited because I have great plans for things that I want to do with my channel in ways in which I want to make it grow. So thank you so much for following me and for sticking with me, and I have very exciting things in the future, so stay tuned. Like I said, it's been a little while, but I'm very excited to tell you a little bit about my last few steps in my journey to find my absolute favorite reimagining of Austen's novels. And I decided to do this because I'm starting to put together a project on Jane Austen in popular culture. Yes, I'm already thinking about the next book. And I'm reading as many reimaginings, as I call them, reimaginings of Austen's novels as I can. So if you have written one or know someone who has written one, please get in touch because I would absolutely love to read it. And today I'm going to tell you about the latest one I have read. It's called The Secret Life of Miss Mary Bennet by Katherine Cowley. And Katherine lives in Michigan, and she very kindly sent this lovely book to me all the way from the US. So I really appreciate it. Mary Bennet has traveled a long way to come and be with me here in the kind of half sunny England. So I really appreciate it. She has come a long way. And in The Secret Life of Miss Mary Bennet, Mr. Bennet has just died, as we know he eventually would, leaving Mary, Kitty, and their mother in the turmoil that we always knew was going to characterize their lives once the patriarch of the family died. And as Mary is trying to come to terms with the loss of her father, she receives a visit in the middle of the night, I know, very spooky, from a Lady Trafford, so someone who she has never met before, and this woman claims to be a relative. And this relative offers to help Mary get her life together, such as by becoming a governess. So she offers to pay for her education so that she can become a woman of independent means. So Mary follows Lady Trafford to her property, Castle Durrington, only to become involved in a mystery that she doesn't quite understand. And at a time when the country is fearing the possibility of an invasion by Napoleon, the small seaside town in which Mary finds herself seems to be involved in a net of secrets and manipulations. But who is hiding what, and who can she trust? So I didn't do it on purpose to focus on reimaginings of Austen's novels that are written from the point of Mary Bennet. It just seems to have kind of worked out that way, that these were the ones that made their way to me first. But I find it so fascinating that this character has clearly ignited the imagination of so many writers all over the world. I think that's really great. And I've been trying to think about why that was, and I actually think the answer is very simple. And I also think that the blurb of The Secret Life of Mary Bennet points to this reason. Never underestimate the observation skills from a woman who hides in the background. And this really sums up, I think, the reason why we keep going back to Mary. She is the one Bennet sister who merges with the background. Elizabeth is good looking and outspoken. Jane is, we are told, a rare beauty. Kitty and Lydia are loud. So the only one that nobody really notices is Mary. And because in the original novel, when she does talk, even when she does talk, she hides behind these very boring, prescriptive, uncreative moral works. We don't really get to know her at all. We don't really get to know what her true personality is like. And that has two consequences, I think. One is that the things we do know about Mary make us want to believe that there is something more to her. So the authors who write reimaginings about Austen's novels focused on Mary clearly are people who have a passion for books. So it's not really that surprising that they should relate to a character that is described as bookish. I think for all of us, if a character is described as being similar to us in that sense, we are more drawn to her naturally. And if you are anything like me, someone who went to a high school where reading and writing wasn't really considered to be the coolest thing you could do, let's put it like that, then you probably identify with her even more in the ways in which she gets dismissed and underestimated. If you have experienced firsthand not having these abilities and these likes necessarily very highly rated, I should say. And I think that then there is another consequence. Because we know so little about Mary, it's easy to superimpose whatever image of her we create on the original character. So we know how Elizabeth reacts to various kinds of situations, when she's happy, angry, frustrated, afraid, hopeful, desperate. We get a pretty good idea of what kind of person she is. We see her react to a lot, but not Mary. Mary basically parrots her way through the original novel. And because of this, it's fun to imagine how Mary would react if faced with some pretty extreme circumstances. And this is why she makes such a good character to mold into the protagonist of a detective story. And this is where we get into the secret life of Mary Bennet. So as you can tell from the summary I gave, this is a mystery novel with a beginning that will bring to mind Northanger Abbey, with this heroine going over to this huge gothic-y property in the middle of nowhere. And I would say also Mansfield Park, because we have the heroine that no one cares about finding herself dependent on family members she doesn't know and having to deal with various challenges that happen while she's with them. And one thing that I've been loving about reading these Mary-centered novels is how different they are from each other and how they each create a Mary that offers something completely new and different, and some completely new and different possibilities, really. And I'll leave links below to reviews of previous books that I've read that were also Mary-centered, so that you can see what I mean. But one thing that I thought was really, really interesting is how influential the 2005 adaptation of Pride and Prejudice clearly was in the way in which this generation of Austen readers imagines the Bennet sisters, and particularly Mary. The beginning of this book starts much like Jennifer Duke's Back to the Bonnet, another Mary-centered book that I reviewed and loved, with Mary playing the piano at Longbourn. And I'll read you a little bit of it. Miss Mary Bennet could do nothing to stop her life from shattering to pieces, so she played the pianoforte. Her cousin, Mr. Collins, had arrived to take possession of Longbourn before her father, Mr. Bennet, was even in the grave, as we always knew he would. As Mr. Collins and the men he had hired swept through the house, removing items he had sold, Mary attempted to drown out the commotion by playing faster and faster, louder and louder, until her younger sister Kitty exclaimed, "Can you please stop, Mary?" So, like in the 2005 movie, we get this image of Mary as someone who retires back into herself in order to pacify and deal with the commotion that is her daily life. So Mary is very clearly described as an introvert. And this distinguishes her from her sisters. They make noise while Mary tries to drown it out. And while in the movie there is some unity between the sisters, Jane and Elizabeth, Lydia and Kitty, Mary is always presented as being on the sidelines. But there is also a hint of rebellion, of resistance here. This reminds me also of the beginning of Becoming Jane, which also starts with Jane Austen, played by Anne Hathaway, waking the entire household up by playing the piano. And this is very much a way of representing her as someone who dances to her own tune, and it hints at some independence of mind as well. And so this is the perfect beginning for a story about Mary. It distinguishes her from the other characters, and it also hints at the fact that this reserved, seemingly inoffensive person has an interior life and a spirit, potentially a defiant spirit, that we know nothing about yet. And as someone who works on women in property in Austen, I really like how all of the authors that I've read so far of Mary-centered reimaginings have focused on the question of the entail on the Longbourn property and how this affects Mary. The moments in which Mary is dealing with her dispossession, for example, when she reminds herself that the house in which she is living was somewhere that she felt was hers, even though legally it obviously wasn't, and now it no longer is. These are my absolute favorite moments. And Mary had become accustomed to think of herself as the owner, if not of the entire house, then at the very least of the room that she inhabited. But the cold reality of her father's death steals that away from her. The security that came from imagining herself as the owner of a bedroom was fragile and precarious, absolutely, but ultimately powerful. And it gave her a sense of security and belonging that she then loses when Mr. Collins takes over, as Cowley writes. "I will," said Mary, and then before anyone could say another word, she slipped out of the conversation and up to her room, or, to be more factual, to one of Mr. Collins's rooms that she was borrowing. And this is really telling because this room was never Mary's. It was her father's. This was her father's house. But there is something about that home being owned by your father, a father that is a decent person, that makes it so that you imagine that it's yours. And this becomes very different when Mr. Collins takes over. And one of my favorite things about this book was how grounded it was in the historical and political context of the time. So each chapter begins with an excerpt from a newspaper article with a date and indicating to us what was happening in the UK at that time. And let me see if I can show you an example. So for example, chapter 4 has that little excerpt. And I thought that was just such a clever idea. And also a really cool way of reminding us that this was a period of war and that fear of a foreign invasion was something that these people were dealing with on their day-to-day lives. And just because not every chapter begins with this worry, it doesn't mean that it wasn't on the back of Austen's mind when she was writing this novel. And I think it becomes a really cool thing to bring it out into the light and to make it the center of this reimagining. And I don't want to go into too much detail as that would spoil some of the plot of the novel, but I really liked how much research went into this book and how Cowley really spent time investigating the historical and the political context, and even some aspects like letter locking that were really, really fun to read. And as a writer myself, I really like getting insights into the ways in which the writers would have spent their time researching the book. And I think this work has clearly been done here. And I had a lot of fun losing myself into this alternative Austen universe and the mystery story that Cowley created, and the character of Mary that Cowley imagined for the book just really shows how the possibilities for reimaginings of Mary are endless and reimaginings of Austen are endless. And speaking of endless, I would say that the ending of this book may leave possibilities open for a sequel, maybe more than one. So stay tuned, because I'm sure that Cowley is going to have some news to share with us soon. I think that's my inkling. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and stay tuned for more adventures in alternative Austen worlds. And if you think that there is an Austen reimagining that I should absolutely read, you can drop me a line in the comments. And until then, stay well and keep reading.